Gen Z isn't lazy. In fact, quite the opposite. We've covered this in a bunch of videos recently. They're simply the only generation to have the balls to stand up to toxic workplace abuse and the smarts to realize that there's literally just no incentive to work for these dogshit wages. And people confuse this with them being lazy. However, what if I told you that none of these are the biggest reason Gen Z isn't lazy? Not even close. You see, the strongest, most powerful, and most irrefutable evidence that Gen Z isn't lazy is the simple fact that laziness itself does not exist. Yes, you heard that right. There's no such thing as laziness. It's all just a massive corporate lie and a psy-op. And Gen Z can't be lazy for the same reason that Gen Z can't be unicorns. You can't be something that doesn't exist in the first place. I'm not talking about lazy people here. I'm talking about the very concept, the idea, the definition of the word lazy itself. It's all just a massive evil psy-op, a dark manipulation tactic used for centuries to justify the slavery and exploitation of billions of people. But it's time you knew the truth. Every day, I'm seeing more and more hope in millions of young people starting to wake up and realize how BS the system is. And now it's time we expose it once and for all. And perhaps the best place to start is with the question, where did the word lazy come from to begin with? Part 1. The word lazy. The word lazy first appeared in English around 1540. Even back then, it was used in a judgmental way to mean someone who disliked work or effort. Many etymologists believe it came from either the Middle Low German lasik, which meant feeble or weak, or from the Old English lesu, which meant false or evil. These two origins illustrate the odd doublespeak at work whenever we call somebody lazy. When we say someone is lazy, we're saying they're incapable of completing a task due to physical or mental weakness. But we're also claiming that their lack of ability somehow makes them morally corrupt. It's not that they're tired or even dispirited in some way we might sympathize with. The word implies that they're failures on a fundamental human level. The idea that lazy people are evil fakers who deserve to suffer has been embedded in the word since the very start. One of the major factors that caused the laziness lie to spread throughout the United States was the arrival of the Puritans. The Puritans had long believed that if a person was a hard worker, it was a sign that God had chosen them for salvation. Hard work was believed to improve who you were as a person. Conversely, if a person couldn't focus on the task at hand or couldn't self-motivate, that was a sign that they had already been damned. This meant, of course, that there was no need to feel sympathy for people who struggled or failed to meet their responsibilities. By lacking the drive to succeed, they were displaying to the world that God hadn't chosen them for heaven. When the Puritans came to colonial America, their ideas caught on and spread to other, less pious colonists. For many reasons, a belief system that judged and punished the lazy was about to become very popular and politically useful. This is an excerpt on one of the most eye-opening books I've ever read, Laziness Does Not Exist, by psychology professor Devon Price. By exposing the historical origins of the word lazy, we can now see how it's been weaponized as a massive psy-op, a psychological manipulation tactic used by traditional and modern slave owners alike to keep us docile and obedient, because their profits and exploitation literally depend on that. You guys all remember what happened in 2020. The world shut down. We all had to stay home, and as a result, businesses were forced to adopt work from home. Now, they initially thought that this was just a temporary hiccup, and that once things went back to normal, people would go right back to the office as if nothing had happened. But as we all know, things went very differently. The extra time people had at home gave them the time and space to really reevaluate their lives and question why they were working so much. a lot of them woke up and realized they were being exploited, and that unlike what we've been brainwashed to believe for centuries, there's actually more to life than work. And so the Great Resignation began. People quit their jobs in droves, and this led to a very brief moment where, for the first time in forever, workers actually had meaningful leverage over their employers. Of course, employers, aka modern day slave owners, couldn't stand this, and as a result, we've recently seen a massive obsession enforcing return to office policies. What's very revealing about this is that it's not about productivity or even about profits. People slack off in the office the same way they do at home. Countless studies have actually shown that working fewer hours can actually improve productivity, as people are more engaged in the time they are working, unlike just pretending to work and waiting for the clock to hit 5, as we've all experienced. So, if it's not about productivity and it's not even about profits, this begs a very interesting question. What could these modern day slave owners find to be even more important than profits? The answer is psychological control and manipulation. Have you ever wondered why our work is based on time and not results? Like, why are we forced to work for a fixed 8-hour shift? Wouldn't it make more sense to just be given a certain amount of tasks to complete, and then once you're done, you're free? This would definitely make a lot more sense, especially when you consider profits are made based on what you've actually done, not how much time you spent at work. Well, the answer once again lies in the historical origins of the laziness psy-op. In the early days of colonial America, slaves were a big part of the emerging American economy. Now, being a slave owner came with one big challenge. Sure, you could keep individual slaves obedient with the threat of force and violence. However, if you push them too far over the edge, they could start organizing and eventually revolting. The solution to all this? Weaponize the word lazy and shame them into believing any leisure time is a sin. Keep them working for as much time as possible, because the more time they spend working, the less time they have to talk amongst each other, realize how bullshit their situation is, and eventually organize a rebellion. This is the one and only priority for them that's even more important than profits. And the craziest part? The exact same situation still goes on today, hundreds of years later. Let's say you work at a fast food restaurant. Have you ever stopped to wonder why you're being paid based on how many hours you work, rather than how many burgers you flip? From a pure profit standpoint, the amount of burgers you flip is the only thing that matters. If you flip 10 burgers, the restaurant makes the same amount of money, whether it takes you 2, 4, or 8 hours to make them. So why are they so invested in keeping you there for the full 8 hours? Well, it's simple. The more time you spend at work, the more your mind is occupied with the misery of work. And the less time you have to talk to your coworkers, realize how bullshit this all is, and organize a union or rebellion demanding better wages and working conditions. Hey guys, just wanted to say real quick, thank you all so much for 20,000 subscribers now. Wow, I seriously am so grateful. I have no words. Like, we're just growing so fast right now. It feels like just yesterday we hit 10K. So yeah, just wanted to say thanks. And if you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing for more epic takedowns of all these evil corporate lies. Part 2, Human Nature. So, one of the main low-hanging fruit criticisms of universal basic income is the human nature argument. But nobody will work. This seems logical on the surface level. Why would anyone work if they no longer needed to? Yet, every actual serious study that's been done on universal basic income has proved this hasn't been the case. In fact, quite the opposite. A German UBI study that recently concluded proved people receiving UBI either work the same or even improve their work, as having a financial safety net gave them the security to either study or look for a better job. Now, in the last video I brought this up, some of you took issue with the small sample size of the study, so here's a UBI study done in Finland across 2,000 individuals that proved the exact same thing. If you're still not convinced, here's a meta-analysis across dozens of unconditional cash transfer programs in Latin American countries, and they all showed the same thing. No systemic evidence of reduced work effort among adults. In fact, in many cases, recipients even worked more or maintained the same levels of employment. That includes both conditional and unconditional transfers. Even when no strings were attached, adults did not stop working. Now, notice how all these studies took place in totally different countries and cultures, yet they all universally led to the same conclusion. People didn't stop working when they got UBI. If anything, they became more ambitious, got better jobs, and furthered their education. Now, of course, we all know of the isolated example of that one guy who just sits around doing nothing all day, but these anecdotes are the exception and not the rule. And this completely disproves the one fundamental lie that this entire laziness psy-op was built upon. The idea that human nature is inherently lazy and thus we need to be coerced into working, whether that's with a whip like in the past or with starvation and homelessness like today. Consider this for a second. When you're a little kid, you have no financial responsibilities at all. You're not worried about paying bills, earning money, or getting a job. These concepts don't even register in your mind just yet. And yet, as we all know, young kids are anything but lazy and unmotivated. They're constantly running around, drawing art, building things, exploring the world, and asking questions. This is why we adults are always complaining about how they have so much energy and why we're so drained after spending a day with them. They're not getting paid to do any of this, nor are they going to starve if they don't work. This is just fundamental human nature. In fact, kids are perhaps the truest form of human nature because this is how we naturally are before the shittiness of life and society gets to us. And even when it comes to the example of young men, quote unquote, living in their mom's basement playing video games, which again have become easy, low-hanging fruit targets for corporate chills, I read a comment the other day that exposed a rare but profound, nuanced take on the real reason this is happening. Video games have simply given young men a sense of meaning and accomplishment that simply isn't attainable in real life in this economy anymore. It's easy to dismiss video games as just meaningless fun, but the truth is, it's probably the most mentally intensive form of entertainment there is. Beating a boss in Elden Ring is objectively 100 times harder than laying on the couch and watching Netflix. It's perceived as lazy because it doesn't involve much physical work, but if mental work doesn't count as work, then CEOs and billionaires who just sit behind desks in a comfortable chair all day are lazy too. Every good video game has significant challenges to overcome, a compelling story that offers purpose and motivation, a feedback loop that represents greater rewards for improving yourself. If we were really inherently lazy and unmotivated, do you really think video games would need to be this mentally challenging? It would be good enough to just make a graphical masterpiece walking simulator with no enemies, no challenges, no objectives, or stories to conquer. This is a perfect example of a common logical fallacy where people confuse cause and effect. We were all naturally and inherently energetic, motivated, curious, and inspired when we were kids, long before we had to worry about paying bills or living up to societal expectations. Modern society, with these horrible low-paying jobs and unbearable living expenses, is what made us disillusioned, demotivated, and quote-unquote lazy, because we realize that no matter how much we work or how hard we try, we're never going to get rewarded for it. This does, however, lead to an even more interesting question, and perhaps the ultimate point of this video. If laziness doesn't actually exist, then what is it? Or what is it that we perceive as laziness? And this is where the psy-op gets really crazy. Part 3, the real psy-op. In my 35 years now of being on this earth and observing how people perceive the concept of laziness, I've noticed something very, very interesting. As we just talked about, human nature is naturally productive and curious. We've all experienced this when we were kids, and we all do enjoy doing some sort of work, whether that's mental or physical. Even playing video games is a lot of mental work, solving puzzles, improving your character, and overcoming challenges. Now, if you're a corporate shill, you might be tempted to laugh at the idea of a guy sitting at home playing video games being considered work. But what happens when that same guy gets good enough and becomes a pro gamer or streamer? Well, at that point, nobody denies that playing a video game can be considered work. But why? He's doing the exact same activity, putting in the exact same mental effort and work. If anything, he was probably more hardworking than before he became a popular streamer, as you're always hungrier when you're chasing a goal than when you've already achieved it. The simple reason we no longer consider him lazy when he becomes a streamer is because once he becomes a streamer, he can now be exploited for corporate profits. And this is perfectly exemplified in the broader creator economy as well. A lot of what Gen Z want to pursue is simply creative and artistic endeavors, as that's what's more fulfilling to them than sitting in a cubicle all day. But they get shamed as being lazy for the simple fact that creative and artistic works are less exploitable for corporate profits. A lot of creators are so passionate about their art that they continuously pursue it for years before they ever make any money from it. You cannot objectively tell me that this is lazy. In fact, it's to be even more respected than doing something just for the money. But once again, once they hit their breakthrough monetization-wise and can be exploited for corporate profits, all of a sudden, they're no longer lazy, even though they're doing the exact same thing as they were before. Perhaps the best example of this is Vincent van Gogh, who spent his lifetime tirelessly painting absolute masterpieces that are now timeless. And yet, no one appreciated it when he was alive, and he was relentlessly criticized and shamed for being lazy, just like you and me. Yeah, we all know what happens next in the story. After his death, his artwork has a sudden renaissance, becomes worth millions of dollars, and people universally admire it hundreds of years later. So, what's going on here? Why does no one call him lazy anymore? Did he magically somehow become less lazy while being a dead corpse in his grave? Obviously not. The only difference and the only reason we don't call him lazy anymore is because his work can now be exploited for corporate profits. Profits that he himself, by the way, will never ever see, even though he created it all. So, as you can see, laziness doesn't exist. What we've been brainwashed to perceive as laziness is simply centuries of slave owner propaganda to shame us for doing anything that can't be exploited for corporate profits. But hopefully this video helped you wake up and realize this, and now you can be totally immune to their propaganda. Now, if you still want to make the case that laziness exists, it's definitely not Gen Z who are the lazy ones. It's not that Gen Z is lazy for not wanting to work, it's that boomers, employers, and society at large is too lazy to pay a decent enough wage and offer reasonable incentives to work in the first place. We explore this more in this video right here. Check it out. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.